I reported our lead surgeon for showing up drunk before a 12-year-old's heart surgery. In response, the hospital retaliated by wrecking my career with false accusations and doctored security footage showing me stealing drugs, something that never happened. Everything changed when the girl's mother turned out to be a senior partner at the state's largest medical malpractice firm. Together, we uncovered 5 years' worth of cover-ups, sending the surgeon and the hospital CEO to prison. I walked away with millions in settlement money, and now teach nurses how to report impaired doctors without destroying their lives. Our entire nursing team was scrubbing in when Dr. Mendoza stumbled into the OR. His eyes were unfocused, and he reeked of alcohol. This was our lead surgeon, the man scheduled to perform open-heart surgery on a 12-year-old girl in just 20 minutes. I watched the other nurses lower their gazes, pretending not to notice. No one wanted to acknowledge what we were all witnessing, but I couldn't stay silent. I ripped off my gloves and rushed to find Dr. Lin, our chief medical officer. She and Mendoza went way back, all the way to med school. Their families vacationed together every summer. Dr. Mendoza is intoxicated, I told her. He can't operate on that little girl. Dr. Lin didn't even glance up from her computer. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof? I can smell it on him. His hands are shaking. Please just come see for yourself. She leaned back in her chair and smiled, like I'd told her a joke. Dr. Mendoza brings in millions of dollars a year to this hospital. Why would I risk that? Her voice turned ice cold. Besides, this is clearly just petty revenge. Everyone knows you've had it out for him since that little incident last year. My stomach dropped. You see, last year, Mendoza had cornered me in the supply closet after a late-night surgery. He pressed himself against me, backed me into the shelves, and tried to kiss me. When I shoved him off and said I'd report him, he just smoothed my hair and walked away. The next morning, the hospital was buzzing with rumors that I'd thrown myself at him and that he had to gently turn me down because he was married. Get back to the OR now, Lin ordered, and if you spread these lies again, I'll make sure you never work in healthcare again. I returned to the operating room to find the anesthesiologist, Dr. Rivera, already prepping the patient. She met my eyes, and I saw that she knew. She had positioned herself close enough to steady Mendoza's elbow as he approached the table. During the timeout before the surgery began, I pulled her aside for one last desperate attempt. I begged her to help stop the operation, to protect this child. But then I noticed something that made my breath catch. She had an engagement ring on her finger. It was the same ring Mendoza's wife had worn for 20 years before she left him. After I told Dr. Rivera what Mendoza had done to me, she looked pained but whispered that she already knew. But I'm his fiancé, and what kind of fiancé would I be if I destroyed his career? Back in the OR, I watched her hands tremble as she drew up another syringe. That's when I realized she wasn't just medicating the patient. She was microdosing Mendoza with benzos through his IV port, trying to keep his hands steady enough to function. She kissed her fingertips and touched them to his shoulder before returning to her station. The surgery began minutes later. Mendoza's hands were shaking as he made the initial incision. Rivera kept subtly touching his arm to help stabilize him, and the assisting surgeon acted like nothing was wrong when Mendoza dropped an instrument inside a child's open chest. At one point, he even laughed and said, "Whoops, Butterfingers today," like he dropped his keys instead of a clamp inside a child's open chest. Things fell apart during the grafting. His motor controls slipped, and he accidentally sliced the left anterior descending artery. Blood flooded the surgical field in an instant. "Clamp, clamp," the assisting surgeon yelled, shoving Mendoza aside to take over. But Mendoza pushed back. I've got it," he insisted, trying to keep operating while the child bled out in front of us. Chaos broke loose. More surgeons poured into the room. Units of blood arrived. The perfusionist worked furiously to keep the bypass machine running while they scrambled to fix the damage. I looked up and saw the child's mother through the observation window. Her face had turned ghost pale. She was crying as she watched her daughter's blood spill across the floor. We managed to save the girl, but just barely.
She would need a heart transplant now. The damage was too extensive. What should have been a routine repair had turned into a death sentence. After the closure, Dr. Lin herself entered the OR. She actually clapped Mendoza on the back. "Tough case. These things happen. We'll handle the family." Then she turned to the rest of us. "I don't need to remind you about confidentiality. We stand together or we fall apart. Anyone who frames this as anything other than an unforeseeable complication will face immediate termination and legal action." Just like that, we were all ushered out. I remember standing in the hallway, overwhelmed with fury. The injustice of it all was suffocating. But then, the next morning, everything changed. Multiple lawyers arrived at the hospital. Mendoza was served in the parking lot. Lin was served during morning rounds. Rivera got her notice in the cafeteria. I was served too. But my papers were different. Attached was a handwritten note. "Thank you for trying. Please be my star witness." I was stunned. I started asking around, trying to understand where these papers had come from. The mystery unraveled quickly, and with it came a surge of disbelief and wild, almost childlike joy. The girl's mother, the woman I had seen through the observation window, wasn't just another grieving parent. She was a senior partner at the largest medical malpractice firm in the state, and she was about to make the hospital pay dearly. The next few days were a blur of professional sabotage. My schedule changed 3 times with no explanation. I arrived for my regular cardiac unit shift only to find myself reassigned, first to pediatric overflow, then geriatrics, then emergency. At every new unit, the charge nurse looked bewildered. Nobody had requested me. The reassignment orders always came directly from Dr. Lin's office. My access badge began malfunctioning. Doors I'd opened for years refused me entry. The med dispensary rejected my fingerprint multiple times before reluctantly letting me through. I blamed system glitches, but oddly, only my credentials were affected. When I tried to document the surgical incident in the EMR, my computer froze. The screen went black, then flashed an error message about unauthorized access. After that, nurses started avoiding me. Conversations died the moment I walked into break rooms. Colleagues I'd worked with for years suddenly took different elevators to avoid me. During shift change, no one gave proper handoff reports. They mumbled patient updates to the floor and rushed off before I could ask questions. I started eating my lunch in the parking garage just to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the cafeteria. The rumors started small but spread fast. First, someone said I'd been drinking before my shift, then that I'd shown up intoxicated on multiple occasions. By the end of the week, the whispers said I had a full-blown substance abuse problem and was just trying to take Dr. Mendoza down with me. Someone left an AA pamphlet in my locker. Another taped the Employee Assistance Program hotline number to my windshield. My patient assignments got worse and worse. Every shift, I received the most difficult cases: aggressive dementia patients who required constant redirection, fresh post-ops with multiple drains and detailed wound care protocols, patients with complex isolation precautions requiring full PPE for every interaction. Normally, these assignments rotated fairly. Now they all fell on me. By the end of each shift, my back screamed, my feet ached, and I felt like I was unraveling. Then, the documentation started to shift. Notes I had written disappeared. Entries I'd never made showed up under my login. One morning, I found a chart note saying I'd administered the wrong dose of medication to a patient I'd never even treated. I reported it to the charge nurse, who just shrugged and said, "Maybe you forgot." IT insisted there was no sign of tampering. That week, I visited my mother at her office. She practiced family law, not medical malpractice, but she was well connected in the legal community. Her small downtown office smelled like coffee and old casebooks. She listened carefully as I laid everything out. Her face darkened with every detail. Then she started making calls. Her tone stayed professional, but I could see her jaw tightening, her hand clenching the receiver. After the third call, she hung up and looked me straight in the eye. "The girl's mother has already contacted several firms. She wants you as a key witness. They're building the case, but they'll need documentation."
I explained the problems with my computer access and the disappearing notes. My mother immediately grabbed a legal pad and started writing. "Document everything by hand," she said. times, dates, witnesses. Keep copies at home. Take photos of your handwritten notes before you leave them at work. Create backup documentation they can't erase. The next morning, I arrived early and put her advice into practice. I carried a small notebook with me everywhere, recording every interaction and every incident. When my badge failed at the cardiac unit entrance, I wrote down the time and the name of the security guard who had to override the system. When I was assigned 4 high-acuity patients while the others had 2, I documented that too. During morning huddle, Dr. Lin showed up unexpectedly. She never attended staff meetings, but this time she stood in the doorway, watching me. As we discussed patient safety protocols, she interrupted to remind everyone of the importance of mental fitness for duty while staring straight at me. A few nurses shifted awkwardly, but no one said a word. After the meeting, I found my locker emptied onto the break room floor. My personal belongings were scattered everywhere. My spare scrubs were soaked in spilled coffee. Pages had been ripped out of my nursing reference books. My stethoscope, my graduation gift from my mother, was gone. Security said the cameras in that hallway were under maintenance. Dr. Rivera began showing up wherever I was assigned. She'd appear outside my patients' rooms just as I was preparing medications, arms crossed, watching silently. During one med pass, she questioned every drug I administered, dosage, indication, route, as if I were a student nurse on her first day. When I answered correctly each time, she just looked disappointed. The intimidation intensified on night shifts. Twice in 1 week, I found my car tires deflated. Security chalked it up to coincidence. Strange calls came into the unit asking for me, but when I picked up, the line went dead. One night, I found a printed photo of my apartment building under my windshield wiper. No note, no context. I began taking different routes home, parking in different lots. My mom advised me to install a doorbell camera. I did. The very first night, it caught something. Someone in hospital scrubs standing at my front door at 3 a.m. They didn't knock. They just stood there for several minutes, face carefully turned away from the camera, then left. Some colleagues began quietly showing support despite the risks. Sarah from the pediatric ICU started eating lunch with me in the parking garage. She didn't say much, but her presence meant the world. Tom from the ER began accidentally leaving hospital policy printouts on the break room table, highlighted sections about whistleblower protections left in plain sight. During one especially brutal shift, I was told to float between 3 separate units. Running constantly between floors wore me down. In the cardiac step-down unit, I found Dr. Mendoza reviewing charts at the nurse's station. He looked up when I passed by. His eyes were clear for once. He said, "Heard you've been having some difficulties. Shame about your computer access. These systems can be so unreliable." He closed the chart. "You know, that little girl's getting excellent care now. Sometimes complications lead to better outcomes. Wouldn't want anyone suggesting otherwise." I said nothing, just kept drawing up insulin, steady hands, double-checking the dose. He waited, clearly expecting a reaction. When none came, he finally walked away. I immediately documented the encounter in my notebook. The time, the details, and the fact that the charge nurse had witnessed it from across the station. The law firm representing the girl's mother reached out through my mother's office. They needed my detailed account of the surgery and everything that had followed. I met with them after a night shift, running on fumes, but determined. The lead attorney, a sharp and composed woman named Patricia Chen, took meticulous notes as I spoke. She asked clear, specific questions: who was present, what was said, what exactly I had seen. "We'll need documentation," she told me. "The hospital is going to claim this was just a standard complication."
Your testimony is crucial, Patricia Shen said, but we need supporting evidence. I showed her the handwritten notes I'd been keeping, along with the photos I'd taken. She nodded, satisfied. "Keep doing this. Document everything, no matter how minor it seems." Back at the hospital, the retaliation ramped up. My annual performance review, which had always been glowing, suddenly turned up with needs improvement ratings in multiple categories. The comments accused me of difficulty working with colleagues and resistance to feedback. I hadn't even seen the review until it was finalized and filed with HR. Then my nursing license renewal hit a snag. The state board said they required additional documentation related to recent concerns about my fitness to practice. When I called to ask what those concerns were, they couldn't give me specifics, just vaguely advised that I might want to seek legal counsel. My mother immediately connected me with a licensing attorney. But the breaking point came during a night shift in the ICU. I was caring for a post-op patient when their vitals began to decline rapidly. I initiated interventions and called for backup. That's when Dr. Mendoza appeared, insisting he take over. His hands trembled as he assessed the patient, and the stench of alcohol hit me, stronger than ever. I stepped back, but stayed in the room, documenting every detail. He began ordering medications that didn't make clinical sense. When I questioned the dosages, he snapped at me. "Follow orders or find another job." The charge nurse stepped in just in time. Without a word, she placed a call for a second opinion. Dr. Patel arrived within minutes. He took one look at the situation, calmly took charge, and stabilized the patient, while Mendoza stood there swaying slightly and saying nothing. No one said it aloud, but Patel had just prevented a tragedy. Afterward, he turned to me and said quietly, "Document everything you saw, every single detail." The next morning, I found my car keyed in the hospital parking lot. Deep, jagged scratches ran along both sides. Security offered their usual excuse: the cameras in that area were still down for maintenance. I took photos and filed a police report, knowing nothing would come of it. The message was clear: they wanted me gone. But something was shifting. More nurses began to show quiet signs of support. They couldn't speak up openly, but their gestures were unmistakable. Extra supplies appeared in my patients' rooms when I was stretched thin. The most difficult patients were suddenly reassigned without explanation. And any time Mendoza or Rivera came near me, someone always seemed to be nearby, watching. My mother arranged a formal meeting with Patricia Shen and her full legal team. They had been building their case meticulously. Other families had started coming forward with disturbing stories about surgeries Mendoza had performed. Former nurses, those who had left the hospital, were willing to testify about the toxic culture and long-standing cover-ups. My handwritten documentation became critical evidence. "We're going to depose you next week," Patricia said. "They're going to try to discredit you, bring up the rumors, question your motives. Be ready, but we have evidence now." She showed me something that made my breath catch. Security footage from the day of the surgery. Someone had saved it before it could be erased. It clearly showed Mendoza's impaired state before he entered the OR. The hospital administration must have known the end was near. Dr. Lin called an all-staff meeting, framing it as a conversation about unity during difficult times. She spoke about loyalty and the importance of standing by our colleagues. Her gaze found me more than once during the speech. The message was unmistakable, but it was already too late. That night, I worked what I didn't realize would be my last shift for a while. Everything seemed normal, until I received an urgent page to report to Dr. Lin's office. When I arrived, she was waiting behind her desk, flanked by the head of HR and hospital legal counsel. They informed me I was being placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into patient care concerns. I asked what concerns, but they kept it vague. Discrepancies in documentation, complaints from concerned colleagues. They demanded my badge and keys on the spot. Security would escort me to clear out my locker. I wasn't allowed to return to my unit or say goodbye to my patients. As I was walked through the hospital halls, people watched from doorways. Some quickly looked away. Others met my eyes with a flicker of understanding. Sarah slipped a folded note into my hand as I passed. Tom gave me a nod from the elevator. Even staff I barely knew seemed to understand exactly what was happening. My mother was waiting for me in the parking lot.
My mother had already received a call from Patricia Chen, who somehow knew about my suspension before I even got into her car. We sat in the front seat together, me shaking from a mixture of rage and exhaustion. Everything I had worked for, my entire career, was crumbling, all because I'd tried to protect a child. "This is exactly what we expected," my mother said, calm and composed. "They're panicking. Patricia says this actually strengthens the case. It shows a consciousness of guilt, a clear pattern of retaliation. You did everything right. Now we let the legal system do its job." That night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by boxes of evidence, photos of tampered schedules, handwritten notes on every incident, emails printed and sorted by date, timelines drawn in marker. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from coworkers who had finally found the courage to reach out.
Each had a story of their own, about Mendoza, about Lynn, about the toxic culture that had protected both of them for years. The deposition was scheduled for the following week. Patricia's team prepared me thoroughly, but I still felt uneasy. Everything depended on me telling the truth, clearly, completely. A little girl was still waiting for a new heart because I hadn't acted fast enough. I hadn't pushed hard enough. This was my chance to make it right. As I sorted through the evidence again, I thought of all the patients who had suffered in silence, the nurses too afraid to speak, the families who placed their trust in us, only to be betrayed by a system that cared more about profits than people. The fear that had gripped me for so long hardened into something new, determination. They had taken my job, but not my voice. They had tried to destroy my reputation, but in doing so, they'd exposed their own corruption. The woman in the observation window had seen everything, and now she was making sure everyone else did too. Justice might be slow, but it was coming. Then my phone rang. Patricia's voice was steady, but I could hear the excitement underneath. "We just got word 2 more nurses are stepping forward, former staff. They left because of similar situations." She paused. "This is bigger than just one surgery. Are you ready for this?" I looked up at my nursing license hanging on the wall and thought of the oath I had taken, to do no harm, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." The next 3 days were a blur of deposition prep. Patricia and her team set up in a downtown conference room surrounded by binders, files, and case law. They drilled me on every potential question, coached me to answer directly without offering too much. My mother sat beside me, scribbling notes, offering guidance from her own years of legal experience. During one break, I glanced at my phone and found myself wondering, how had Sarah always known when to be in the parking garage at the right moment? How had Tom known which policies to leave behind? The timing of it all, it had felt too perfect. Had they been coordinating behind the scenes? A quiet resistance? Messages kept coming in from hospital staff. Dr. Lynn had announced a mandatory ethics seminar for all nursing personnel. Officially, it was about professional standards and appropriate reporting channels. Unofficially, everyone knew it was a warning. Sarah sent me photos of the new policy flyers posted everywhere. One outlined mandatory reporting of disruptive behavior by colleagues. Another described broadened grounds for immediate termination, including creating a hostile work environment and undermining hospital leadership. The language was vague, dangerously so. It could be used to target anyone who dared to speak up. The night before my deposition, I'd barely slept. I combed through my notes again, cross-checking every timestamp, every name, every line of dialogue. Around midnight, my doorbell camera alerted me to motion. I checked the feed. Someone in dark clothes approached my front door, dropped off an envelope, and walked away, never turning toward the lens. I waited until morning to retrieve it. Inside was a single typed page. "Withdraw your testimony. This is your only warning." No signature, no logo, nothing to identify who had sent it. I immediately took photos and forwarded them to Patricia. Her reply came within minutes. "File another police report. Don't go anywhere without your phone. Vary your routine more." The deposition took place in a sleek, impersonal conference room downtown. Dr. Lynn's legal team included 3 lawyers in polished suits and practiced smiles. They began with seemingly harmless questions about my work history, my certifications, my training. Then they pivoted straight into my alleged conflicts with Dr. Mendoza. They delivered the false narrative with expert precision. According to their version of events, I had pursued Dr. Mendoza romantically and turned vengeful after he rejected me. They produced emails I had allegedly sent, emails I had never seen before in my life. When I denied ever writing them, they questioned my memory, hinting that I might be confused about a lot more than just this. Patricia Chen objected multiple times, but the damage was being done. They painted me as unstable, jealous, and prone to making false accusations. They brought up my recent performance review, the so-called concerns about my patient care, and anonymous reports they claimed to have received about my behavior. Every fabricated document, every forged report was another piece in the case they were trying to build. Then they shifted to the surgery. They downplayed Mendoza's impairment, implying that I had exaggerated what I saw or misunderstood it entirely. Complications happen in surgery, they said. Who was I to judge a surgeon's performance? When I mentioned the overwhelming smell of alcohol, they mused aloud about whether I might have been projecting. After 6 exhausting hours, we finally broke for lunch. I sat shaking in a bathroom stall, fighting back tears of rage and fatigue. Patricia found me there and reminded me, gently but firmly, that this was exactly what we had anticipated. Their desperation is showing. They're relying on character assassination because the facts aren't on their side. She had been taking notes the entire time, carefully tracking every lie, contradiction, and impossibility in their timeline. The afternoon session focused on my supposed pattern of disruption at the hospital. They read statements from nurses I had never worked with, strangers claiming I was difficult, paranoid, unstable. Then they presented a psychological evaluation I had allegedly failed. I had never taken one. The forgery was detailed and convincing, but false. Patricia sat calmly through it all, letting them talk, knowing the more they pressed, the more they revealed their own tactics. When their questioning finally ended, Patricia began her redirect. She dismantled their version piece by piece. She pointed out the gaps in their timeline, the inconsistencies in the forged documents. She read statements from dozens of nurses, former and current, vouching for my integrity, skill, and professionalism. That evening, I met with a group of former colleagues at a small coffee shop across town. Every one of them had faced the same treatment after raising concerns about hospital practices. Catherine had reported medication errors committed by Mendoza while he was impaired. She was quietly reassigned to night shifts, then fired for attendance issues that were entirely fabricated. Sebastian had tried to report Dr. Lin for pressuring nurses to falsify patient satisfaction scores. He was investigated for supposed HIPAA violations. The charges were dropped, but not before he lost his job and spent thousands on legal fees. The pattern was unmistakable and devastating. We traded documentation, shared contacts, and began forming an informal network of witnesses. Catherine had already reached out to many of them, laying the groundwork for a broader lawsuit. This wasn't just about one surgery gone wrong anymore. It was about a hospital culture built on intimidation, cover-ups, and silence. My mother helped me apply for unemployment benefits and health insurance. The process was humiliating after years of spotless employment. She also connected me with a therapist who specialized in workplace trauma. I resisted at first, but the sessions helped me begin to process the betrayal, the rage, the grief. Meanwhile, the hospital's campaign to destroy me continued. Recruiters who had seemed eager to hire me abruptly withdrew their offers after contacting references. My professional social media pages were hit with waves of anonymous negative comments. Someone had created fake profiles using my name and photo, posting inappropriate content designed to damage my reputation. One evening, Tom from the emergency department met with me in secret. He brought copies of internal emails, memos from Dr. Lin to HR, instructing them to handle the situation aggressively. There were serious discussions about pressing criminal charges against me for theft of hospital property, even though I had taken nothing. They were determined to ruin me completely. Tom also shared what I had suspected. Dr. Rivera was unraveling. She had begun making medication errors. She was late to shifts. Nurses had found her crying in the supply closet more than once. The pressure of maintaining the lie, of working beside Mendoza while pretending everything was fine, was clearly breaking her. Other nurses had reported concern about her mental health, but Lin was still protecting her. As new evidence surfaced, Patricia Chen's legal team filed additional motions. They pushed for preservation of electronic records before anything else could be deleted. They demanded access to security footage from multiple dates. The case was growing fast, and the walls around the hospital were beginning to crack.
Patricia Chen's team subpoenaed communication records between Dr. Lin and members of the hospital board. The hospital's legal team retaliated by accusing me of orchestrating an elaborate conspiracy to extort money. They claimed I had recruited other disgruntled employees to fabricate stories. They even suggested that my mother, as an attorney, had coached me to manufacture a false case. The accusations were baseless, but still required formal legal responses. My savings dwindled as the weeks dragged on without income. I sold jewelry and electronics just to keep up with rent. My mother offered to help, but I knew her finances were already stretched. The stress took a toll. I lost weight, couldn't sleep, and battled relentless headaches. One morning, I discovered my car had been vandalized again. This time, someone had poured sugar into the gas tank. The repairs would cost more than the car itself was worth. I had no choice but to start using public transportation, which added hours to my already difficult routine. Each setback felt designed to break me. Then Sarah called with more disturbing news. The hospital had hired a private investigator to follow me. She had overheard Dr. Lin discussing it with HR. They were watching me, tracking where I went, who I met with, documenting my movements like I was some kind of criminal. Soon I started noticing the same car parked outside different locations. A man with a camera appeared wherever I went. I tried to tell myself it was paranoia, but I knew better. Patricia advised me to keep documenting everything, but to live as normally as I could. Let them waste their resources tailing someone who has nothing to hide, she said. The investigation deepened when Patricia's team discovered a disturbing pattern. Over a 5-year span, 12 nurses had filed formal complaints about Dr. Mendoza, citing impairment, erratic behavior, or misconduct. All 12 had either resigned or been forced out within months of speaking up. The files told a grim story: retaliatory reviews, fabricated disciplinary actions, forced resignations. 3 of the 12 had reported Mendoza for sexual harassment or assault. Each complaint had been quietly buried, dismissed as misunderstandings, or labeled as baseless. 2 nurses signed NDAs in exchange for small settlements. The third had been threatened with a defamation lawsuit until she dropped her complaint entirely. Patricia's team tracked down 8 of the 12. Each nurse shared some version of the same experience. They saw Mendoza impaired, reported it, and had their careers systematically dismantled. Dr. Lin had personally overseen many of the retaliations. The hospital's legal team had clearly refined these tactics over time. Even the girl's mother, an experienced attorney in her own right, faced her own battles. The hospital tried to transfer her daughter to a different facility, claiming they were no longer equipped to provide appropriate care. She had to fight just to keep her daughter in the hospital while she awaited a transplant. Every day brought new bureaucratic roadblocks. Patricia filed a motion to expand the lawsuit into a class action. The hospital's lawyers fought it aggressively, knowing it would expose them to massive liability. What had started as a malpractice suit was now ballooning into something far bigger. The legal tug-of-war consumed weeks: court filings, depositions, hearings. Each side argued whether this was a pattern of systemic misconduct or just isolated incidents. But behind the scenes, the truth was becoming harder to ignore. And then something unexpected happened. Dr. Patel reached out, through my mother. He wanted to meet privately, but was terrified of retaliation. We arranged a meeting at a park outside the city, away from prying eyes. When he arrived, he looked worn down, constantly checking over his shoulder. He told us that he had been documenting Mendoza's behavior for over 2 years. He had photos, videos, detailed notes, evidence of incidents where he had taken over surgeries, corrected dangerous orders, and intervened in near catastrophes. He had been quietly building a case, waiting for the right moment to come forward. My case had given him a sliver of hope. But he was scared. He had a family, medical school debt, a visa that was tied directly to his employment. The hospital had made it clear: foreign doctors who made waves risked immigration scrutiny. He wanted to help, but he needed protection. Patricia couldn't promise complete safety. They're paying private investigators to stalk a nurse. God knows what they'd do to him. We developed a secure system for him to share information anonymously. At predetermined drop points, he would leave USB drives with encrypted files. I would retrieve them and pass them to Patricia's team. What he provided was devastating.
Dozens of cases. Patients endangered. Procedures gone wrong. Internal notes that documented incidents but were never escalated. Meanwhile, the cracks were showing in Rivera. Her distress was no longer a secret. She was visibly unraveling, late to shifts, tearful in supply closets, making serious medication errors. Everyone saw it.
She began losing weight rapidly. Her hands trembled during procedures, and she snapped at coworkers over minor things. Nurses whispered about her deteriorating condition. Some pitied her, knowing she was trapped, while others resented her role in the cover-up. Then, one night, Dr. Rivera showed up at my apartment. She looked awful. Dark circles under her eyes, shoulders hunched, fingers shaking. Her voice cracked as she begged me to stop the lawsuit. She said it would ruin Dr. Mendoza and, by extension, destroy her life too. She even offered me money, promising to mortgage her house if that's what it took. I let her speak without interrupting. She talked about how she loved Mendoza despite everything, how she had tried to help him get better, how the pressure to protect him had swallowed her whole. She admitted to medicating him during surgeries, justifying it as a form of harm reduction. She was deep in denial, still trying to frame her actions as noble rather than dangerous. When she finally left, I quietly documented the entire interaction. Patricia Chen found her confession significant. Rivera's admission to medication tampering demonstrated consciousness of guilt, and it could prove critical in court. But watching another healthcare professional unravel under the weight of this corrupt system made me feel nauseous. The hospital board could no longer ignore what was happening as media attention mounted. We had tried to keep things quiet early on, but the sheer scale of the abuse drew too much scrutiny. Journalists began submitting Freedom of Information requests. They interviewed former staff and pieced together a horrifying timeline. News outlets started asking hard questions. In response, Dr. Lin held emergency meetings to strategize around narrative control. New policies flooded the hospital almost weekly. Staff were forbidden from speaking to media without prior approval. Social media guidelines were tightened to the point of absurdity. Anyone caught saying anything negative about the hospital faced immediate termination. The pressure grew unbearable. Tom reported that morale had hit rock bottom. Nurses were transferring out in droves. Patient satisfaction plummeted as overworked, fearful staff struggled to deliver adequate care. The same toxic culture Lin had protected for years was now eating the hospital alive from the inside out. My deposition stretched across multiple sessions as more evidence came to light. Each time, the hospital's legal team grew more vicious. They attacked my professionalism, my motives, my mental health. They presented fabricated psychiatric reports claiming I had personality disorders. But Patricia dismantled each attack systematically. She brought in a team of medical experts who testified about industry standards, what the proper response to an impaired physician should be, and how the hospital had veered wildly from those norms. Their testimony validated everything I had reported. Meanwhile, the financial strain deepened. I moved into a smaller apartment, sold nearly all my furniture, and relied on food pantries to eat. My mother helped when she could, but I hated needing her support. It was clear the hospital's legal strategy was simple: drag this out until I was too broke to keep fighting. Then came a breakthrough. Catherine, the nurse who had reported Mendoza years earlier, had secretly recorded conversations with Dr. Lin during her termination. The audio was rough, but Lin's voice was unmistakable. She was heard threatening Catherine and admitting that she protected Mendoza because of how much revenue he generated. Patricia's team authenticated the recordings through voice analysis. The hospital's lawyers objected, trying to block the tapes on admissibility grounds. But even if the recordings couldn't be played in court, they gave us powerful leverage in negotiations. The hospital's position was beginning to collapse. More families came forward. Parents of children who had suffered unexplained complications during surgeries. Adults with post-op infections or mysterious injuries. Not every case was clear-cut malpractice, but the pattern was glaring. Then Dr. Patel's evidence revealed the worst of it. A patient who died from a completely preventable error,
Mendoza had insisted on operating despite obvious signs of impairment. A teenager who suffered permanent nerve damage from a botched procedure. An elderly woman who went into organ failure after Mendoza prescribed medications she shouldn't have received. Each case had been carefully spun as a tragic complication. Families were told these things happen. Medical records had been scrubbed, rewritten to obscure the truth. Only someone with insider knowledge could trace the connections. And then the pressure finally broke Dr. Rivera. She was found unconscious in an on-call room after overdosing on the same medications she'd been administering to Mendoza. She survived, but barely. She was moved to intensive care.
The incident with Dr. Rivera couldn't be hidden, no matter how hard the administrators tried to minimize it. Her suicide attempt sent shockwaves through the staff, even those who had remained loyal to the hospital leadership. Nurses who had kept quiet began questioning their own silence. Some reached out to Patricia Chen's team, finally ready to testify. The wall of fear and complicity that Dr. Lin had built was beginning to crack. During Rivera's recovery, her parents flew in from across the country. They were horrified when they learned of her role in the cover-up. They hired their own attorney and hinted that she might cooperate with our case in exchange for immunity from prosecution. The hospital board convened an emergency meeting. Several members admitted they hadn't understood the full extent of Dr. Lin's protection of Mendoza. They ordered an independent investigation. Lin tried to narrow the scope of that inquiry, but the investigator they hired had a reputation for thoroughness. Meanwhile, my professional life remained on hold. Every job application ended in rejection following reference checks. My nursing license remained under review due to the hospital's complaints. I began volunteering at free clinics to keep my skills sharp, but the uncertainty weighed heavily on me. Patricia's team was preparing for the next phase. We had enough evidence to go to trial, but we all knew the hospital would likely push for a settlement to avoid public exposure. The question was whether the settlement would include real, systemic change or just a financial payout. I wanted more than money. I wanted Mendoza's medical license permanently revoked. I wanted Dr. Lin removed from power. I wanted enforceable policies that would protect future whistleblowers from retaliation. Patricia warned me, most settlements come with non-disclosure agreements. If I accepted, I could never speak publicly again. As the independent investigation progressed, dozens of current and former employees were interviewed. Preliminary findings validated our allegations. The investigators uncovered patterns of retaliation, suppression of medical errors, and repeated failures to address impaired physicians. The hospital's liability was enormous. Dr. Lin tried to salvage her position by firing mid-level administrators, claiming they had failed to escalate concerns. She cast herself as a victim of poor communication. But the investigators weren't fooled. They traced key decisions and cover-ups directly to her office. As winter approached, the legal pressure intensified. Depositions continued with board members, department heads, and new witnesses. Each session added weight to the mountain of evidence against the hospital. The hospital's insurance provider began pressuring for settlement. They saw the writing on the wall. My support network continued to grow. The nurses who had suffered similar retaliation formed a group that met weekly. We shared our stories, vented our frustrations, and lifted one another up. Some had managed to find new jobs and offered to serve as references. Others were still in the trenches, fighting their own battles. And the little girl, the one at the heart of it all, was still waiting for a transplant. Her condition remained stable, but delicate. Her mother kept us updated during our legal meetings. Every delay in the process was another day her daughter went without the heart she so desperately needed. Eventually, Patricia presented our settlement demand. It included financial compensation for every affected nurse, independent oversight of hospital operations, mandatory reporting procedures for physician impairment, real whistleblower protections, and most crucially, the termination of both Dr. Mendoza and Dr. Lin. The hospital's initial response was exactly what we expected. They offered a token amount, nowhere near what was warranted, and refused to admit wrongdoing. They wouldn't consider personnel changes or external oversight. All they wanted was silence in exchange for cash. We rejected the offer unanimously. We had already lost our careers, our financial stability, and our peace of mind. We weren't going to sign away our right to speak or allow the cycle to continue. Patricia prepared for trial, knowing it would mean months more of uncertainty and public exposure. Then, in a moment of profound courage, Dr. Patel stepped forward. He agreed to testify openly, despite the risk to his career and immigration status. His documentation and eyewitness accounts would devastate the hospital's defense. And his bravery inspired others. More physicians quietly reached out to Patricia's team, expressing willingness to support our case. The hospital's leadership faced a full-blown crisis. Their stock price dropped as news coverage increased. Insurance providers threatened to cut ties. The state health department announced a formal investigation. The empire Dr. Lin had built on fear, secrecy, and intimidation was crumbling. In a final act of desperation, Dr. Lin attempted to frame me, accusing me of stealing controlled substances.
Suddenly, security footage surfaced, showing someone who looked like me accessing the medication room without authorization. The timestamp matched a day I hadn't even been at the hospital. Patricia's team moved quickly. They exposed the deception almost immediately. The real footage from that day placed me downtown at a deposition. The forged video was embarrassingly crude, an insult to anyone's intelligence, and it only highlighted how desperate Dr. Lin had become to protect herself. That stunt backfired spectacularly. The state nursing board accelerated their review of my license. With Patricia's guidance, I presented a full account of the hospital's retaliation. We included Rivera's bizarre visit to Sarah's door in the middle of the night, offering to mortgage her house while defending her impaired partner. It was the kind of surreal denial that would have been laughable if the consequences hadn't been so serious. The board was appalled by the extent of the harassment. They cleared me of all accusations and launched their own investigation into the hospital's practices. As momentum shifted our way, more truth surfaced. It turned out Dr. Mendoza had been reported to the state medical board 3 separate times over the past decade. Each time, Dr. Lin had intervened, leveraging the hospital's legal resources to shield him and discredit the whistleblowers. The protection went deeper than we ever imagined. Financially, I was at the edge. Despite my mother's help, I was on the brink of eviction. My physical health declined from the constant stress, but I couldn't walk away, not when so many others were depending on this case to make lasting change. Then, out of nowhere, help arrived. A wealthy philanthropist who had lost his wife to medical negligence read about our case. He established a fund specifically to support healthcare whistleblowers, covering basic living expenses during ongoing legal battles. It was the lifeline I desperately needed. As trial approached, the hospital made another settlement offer. This one included most of our demands, but still protected Dr. Lin. She would receive a generous severance and retain her medical license. It was better, but it wasn't enough. We pressed on toward trial with renewed purpose. Patricia's team compiled the evidence with surgical precision. Witnesses were ready, even in the face of continued intimidation. This time, the truth would be heard in court. Then, the weekend before trial, Dr. Rivera contacted us through her attorney. She was ready to confess everything. Not just the medication tampering, but details we hadn't even uncovered yet. Her testimony completed the picture. She revealed that Dr. Lin had been taking kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies to promote certain drugs, that Mendoza had performed unnecessary surgeries purely to inflate hospital revenue. What had begun as a cover-up of impairment had evolved into outright criminal activity. Patricia wasted no time. She reported everything to federal authorities. Agents began interviewing witnesses, seizing records, and widening the investigation. What had started as a malpractice lawsuit had become a federal case. Now the hospital board could no longer delay or deflect. They fired Dr. Lin without severance and formally reported Dr. Mendoza to the state medical board. They agreed to every demand we'd made and even added reforms we hadn't thought to request.
Whistleblower protections, third-party monitoring, mandatory reporting protocols. It was a complete reversal. But as I sat in my empty apartment, surrounded by settlement documents and memories of the last year, the victory felt hollow. My career had been decimated, my savings gone, my belief in the healthcare system shattered. Justice had come, yes, but at what cost? The other nurses in our group felt it too. We had won, but many of us were too emotionally exhausted to return to nursing. Some struggled with guilt, wishing they had spoken out sooner. The trauma wouldn't vanish with a settlement. Still, something had changed. Young nurses began reaching out, thanking us, telling us we had made things safer for them. Hospitals across the state began reviewing and updating their whistleblower policies. Medical schools added new training modules about identifying and reporting impairment. And the little girl? She received her heart transplant 2 weeks before Christmas. Her mother sent us photos, her daughter smiling through the healing scars, alive because we refused to be silenced. As I prepared for the final settlement conference, I looked back on everything we'd endured. The system had tried to break me for telling the truth, but I stood my ground with the help of allies I never expected and a fire lit by righteous anger. And we had prevailed. The upcoming conference would finalize specific compensation amounts and the timelines for implementing the agreed reforms. Independent monitors would be appointed to oversee the hospital's compliance. New policies would ensure future whistleblowers were protected. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was real progress. I glanced at my nursing license, still valid despite everything they had done to try to strip it from me. My career could be rebuilt in time. The other nurses and I would heal and move forward. Most importantly, patients would be safer, because we had chosen to speak up. Patricia Chen called with the final details. The hospital wanted to settle before markets opened Monday morning. They would officially admit wrongdoing, implement every requested reform, and fairly compensate all affected parties. Dr. Lin was facing criminal charges. Dr. Mendoza would never practice medicine again. Tomorrow, this long and painful chapter would reach its end. But tonight, I sat surrounded by the women and men who had become my family, my mother, the other nurses, those who had risked everything to stand for the truth. We had stared down a corrupt institution and won. The price had been steep, but the victory was real. The truth had prevailed. The settlement conference was set for Monday morning. I spent the weekend organizing my evidence one last time, laying out every document, every email, every photo. My hands trembled as I sorted through falsified schedules, handwritten records of harassment, screenshots of threats and retaliation. It felt like I was putting my soul on display. Sunday night, Patricia called to go over final strategy. She told me the hospital's board had authorized their legal team to settle at nearly any cost. The criminal investigation had shaken them to the core. Federal agents were still collecting records, conducting interviews. Board members who once defended Lin were now scrambling to separate themselves from the fallout. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that little girl's blood spilling across the sterile floor. I thought of every patient Mendoza had harmed while the hospital protected him. The burden of all we had uncovered felt crushing. Monday morning was cold and gray. I put on the only professional outfit I had left, the others long sold to pay rent. My mother picked me up early. We drove in silence. As we pulled into the law firm's parking garage, she reached over and squeezed my hand. The conference room was already full when we arrived. Patricia's team occupied one side of the massive table. On the other sat the hospital's attorneys and several board members I recognized from staff memos and distant meetings. Notably absent, Dr. Lin and Dr. Mendoza, both now buried in legal battles of their own. The hospital's lead attorney opened with a prepared statement. The board acknowledged widespread failure in identifying and addressing physician impairment. They admitted the institution had retaliated against whistleblowers and failed to uphold patient safety standards. It sounded hollow, after all we had endured, but it was something. Patricia responded with our terms. Every nurse forced out for raising concerns would be fully compensated for lost wages, damaged careers, and emotional trauma. The hospital would fund an independent oversight body for a full 5 years. Mandatory reporting of physician impairment would begin immediately. Most significantly, they would establish a permanent medical care fund for the little girl at the center of it all. Negotiations stretched on for hours. Details, numbers, policy language. I stayed quiet, letting Patricia and her team handle it. Occasionally, I caught glances from across the table, some curious, some apologetic, some simply ashamed. They were finally beginning to grasp the human cost of their silence. During a break, I stepped out into the hallway to clear my head. There, I ran into one of the hospital's attorneys, a woman who had ruthlessly cross-examined me during depositions. She approached slowly, then handed me a plain envelope. Inside was a personal check and a handwritten note, a quiet apology for the role she had played in trying to destroy my credibility. She turned and walked away before I could say a word. When I returned to the room, the final settlement terms were ready. The financial compensation exceeded our original demand. The oversight provisions were stronger than expected. They agreed to notify every patient who had undergone surgery under Mendoza's care while he was impaired, opening themselves to countless lawsuits. It was full capitulation.
Part of me wanted to leave it all behind, bury the pain and move on. But another part knew that silence had enabled this tragedy from the beginning. After intense discussion, we reached a compromise. I agreed not to seek media attention or publish the story for profit, but I retained the right to speak openly in professional settings about the importance of reporting impaired physicians. I could testify in future cases if other nurses faced retaliation. The truth wouldn't be buried, not entirely. The signing process took over an hour. Every document required multiple signatures and notarizations. My hand ached from writing my name again and again. With each stroke of the pen, I felt a blend of relief and grief. We had won, but the cost had been staggering. As we packed up to leave, the chairman of the hospital board approached me. He was an older man, clearly shaken. His voice trembled as he apologized personally for failing in his oversight. He promised that the hospital would change, that my sacrifice would protect future patients. Patricia reminded me that the settlement funds would take a few weeks to process. In the meantime, she had secured an advance to cover my immediate needs. The check she handed me was larger than anything I'd ever held, but it still felt like a meager trade for a shattered career. That afternoon, I met with the nurses from our support group at Catherine's apartment to share the outcome. Each of us would receive compensation, though the amounts varied depending on our circumstances. More importantly, the changes we'd fought for were going into effect. Still, the mood was quiet, almost somber. Sebastian admitted he still had nightmares about his termination. Maria had decided to leave nursing altogether, the trauma too deep for her to return. I found myself wondering how many other nurses across the country had gone through something similar, isolated, financially vulnerable, and punished for doing the right thing. Was there support for them anywhere else? Or had we just been lucky to find one another? We had won a battle, but the war had left scars. Catherine opened a bottle of wine and we toasted, not just to victory, but to surviving. We had faced a corrupt institution and forced it to bend. But as I looked around at the others, I could see the toll it had taken. Lost careers, shattered trust, lives forever changed. The days that followed were a blur of official announcements and behind-the-scenes updates. The hospital issued a carefully worded press release confirming Dr. Lin's termination and the pending criminal charges. They pledged a renewed commitment to patient safety and thanked the employees who had come forward, though they made no mention of the years of cover-ups or the lives their silence had harmed. Dr. Mendoza's medical license was officially revoked by the state board. The findings were scathing, detailing multiple instances of practicing while impaired, sexual misconduct, and reckless patient endangerment. Criminal charges followed, including those related to the unnecessary procedures Dr. Rivera had disclosed. His downfall was absolute and deserved. Rivera reached a plea agreement with prosecutors in exchange for her testimony. She was sentenced to probation and ordered to undergo counseling. Her license was suspended for 2 years, pending proof of rehabilitation before she could return to medicine. Then I received a call I wasn't expecting, from the mother of the little girl who needed the heart transplant. She thanked me for my courage, for speaking up even when it cost me everything. Her daughter was recovering well. She invited me to visit once the girl was stronger. I promised I would. The Independent Oversight Committee launched immediately. They began interviewing staff, reviewing internal protocols, and rolling out new systems for incident reporting. Tom, who had risked so much to support me in secret, was appointed as the hospital's liaison to the committee. He called to update me, his voice filled with cautious optimism. Other hospitals in the region began contacting Patricia Chen's firm, hoping to proactively reform their own internal policies. They had seen what happened when misconduct was ignored and wanted to prevent similar fallout. Our case had sparked ripple effects throughout the healthcare system. My mother helped me start looking for new work. My license was clear, and the settlement gave me breathing room. But I wasn't ready to return to bedside nursing. The memories were still too raw. Instead, I began exploring positions in healthcare advocacy and patient safety. I wanted to help others navigate the very system that tried to break me. Then one evening, Sarah called, her voice tinged with something unexpected. News I never saw coming.
The nursing staff had taken a vote to dedicate the hospital's annual Excellence Award in my name. It would now be given each year to a nurse who demonstrated exceptional moral courage. The administration approved the change as part of their reform efforts. When Sarah told me, I cried. Not out of happiness, but from a tangled web of emotions I couldn't fully name. They were honoring me for doing what every nurse should do: protect patients. The fact that it had taken such courage only underscored how broken the system had been. Dr. Patel, who had risked everything by coming forward, was promoted to a leadership position in the surgical department. He was now responsible for implementing new protocols to monitor physician fitness for duty. He called to thank me for giving him the strength to finally act on what he had known deep down for years. The criminal trials proceeded slowly but steadily. Dr. Lin was charged with multiple counts: fraud, conspiracy, obstruction. Her assets were frozen. She faced serious prison time. The woman who had once held so much power over us now appeared in court in handcuffs. I attended one of the hearings. I needed to see her held accountable. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her designer suits replaced by standard jail attire. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I saw no remorse, only anger. Anger at being exposed. Even now, she believed she had done nothing wrong. Eventually, the settlement funds arrived. I paid off my debts, reimbursed my mother for every dollar she had spent on me, and put money aside for further education. The rest went into savings. I had learned just how quickly stability could vanish when you dared to stand up to power. Patricia Chen invited me to speak at a medical ethics conference. At first, I hesitated. Was I ready to relive everything publicly? But then I thought of all the nurses still out there, afraid, isolated, trying to do the right thing with no protection. If my story could help even one of them, it was worth it. The conference was held at a university medical center. I stood in front of an audience of healthcare professionals and students. My voice trembled at first, but the truth gave me strength. I spoke about fear, how it silences healthcare workers and puts patients at risk. I spoke about retaliation and resilience, about the cost of courage. Afterwards, people lined up to speak with me. Some shared stories of watching impaired colleagues and not knowing what to do. Others thanked me for showing them how to build a framework for action. A medical student said my story had changed her view of professional responsibility forever. Invitations started coming in. Nursing schools asked me to speak to their students. Hospitals requested my help revising their whistleblower protocols. I hadn't planned it, but I had found a new calling: in advocacy, in reform, in helping others survive what I had barely escaped. And then I got a photo from the girl whose life had changed everything. She had just turned 13. Her mother sent me a picture from her birthday party. She was laughing, surrounded by friends. Her surgical scars were hidden beneath a bright pink sweater. She was alive because one nurse had refused to stay silent. 6 months after the settlement, I returned to the hospital for the first time for the inaugural presentation of the Excellence Award. Walking those halls was harder than I expected. The memories were still raw. The break room whispers, the locked doors, the loneliness. But this time, I also saw change. New posters lined the walls, outlining how to report safety concerns. Staff who had once looked away now approached with nods and quiet words of respect. The culture Dr. Lin had ruled over with fear was slowly being replaced by one grounded in integrity. The ceremony took place in the same auditorium where she once delivered veiled threats about unity. Now the new chief medical officer stood at the podium and spoke about the power of moral courage in medicine. When they announced the award in my name, the entire room stood and applauded. The first recipient was a young nurse who had reported a series of medication errors despite immense pressure to stay silent. She told me she'd read about our case, that it had shown her not only that speaking up was the right thing to do, but that she would now be protected for doing so. As I handed her the award, I saw my own journey reflected in her actions. Only this time, she wouldn't have to walk through it alone. That night, I had dinner with my mother and the nurses who had become my chosen family. We had all taken different paths, some back into nursing, others into teaching, public health, or leadership roles. Despite everything, we had survived, and many of us had found new purpose through the pain. On my drive home, I passed by the old apartment building where I had once lived through the worst of it all. New tenants live there now, unaware of the sleepless nights I had spent hunched over legal documents, terrified and determined, with nothing but truth and a pen. I didn't stop, but I looked up at the windows and whispered one word to myself. Survivor.
I had moved on, but the memories stayed with me. My new role as a patient safety consultant kept me busy. I traveled across the region, working with hospitals to develop more effective and transparent reporting systems. Each institution had its own culture, but beneath the surface, I kept seeing the same thing: fear, silence, and a reluctance to challenge authority. The same conditions that had allowed tragedy to flourish at my old hospital. During one consultation, I met a young nurse who reminded me of myself, years ago. She had witnessed something wrong, but was terrified to report it. I spent hours with her, sharing my experience and walking her through the protections now in place. When she finally filed her report, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. Not just justice, but prevention. The criminal trials eventually concluded, though the results were mixed. Dr. Lin was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 5 years in prison. It didn't feel like enough, not for the harm she caused, the careers destroyed, the lives endangered, but it sent a message. Administrators who shield dangerous doctors won't be protected forever. Dr. Mendoza pleaded guilty to avoid a longer sentence. He received 3 years. He will never hold a scalpel again. During his sentencing, families of those he harmed gave impact statements. Their pain was overwhelming, but so was their relief. Relief that he could never again endanger another patient. Dr. Rivera completed her probation and mandatory counseling. She sent me a letter, an apology for her role in enabling Mendoza. She said she was working at a rehabilitation center now, trying to rebuild her life and make amends. I didn't respond, but I hoped, for everyone's sake, that she meant what she wrote. A year after the settlement, the Oversight Committee released its first public report. It confirmed that the hospital had made meaningful progress. Reports of concern had increased significantly. Several impaired physicians had been identified early and supported before they could harm anyone. The report directly credited the bravery of the nurses who had come forward. It acknowledged that true reform had only happened because people were willing to risk everything to demand accountability.
The hospital was finally becoming what it should have always been, a place where patient safety was paramount. I continued speaking at conferences, consulting with institutions, and helping hospitals revise their policies. My story had become part of something bigger, a growing movement to protect healthcare whistleblowers. Laws were being updated, cultures were slowly shifting. Progress was slow, but it was happening. Sometimes late at night, I thought about what would have happened if I had stayed quiet that day in the operating room. How many more patients would Mendoza have harmed? How many more nurses would have been silenced? I knew I had made the only choice my conscience would allow. The financial settlement brought stability, but the true reward came every time I saw policy changes put in place, or a nurse felt safe enough to report something without fear. Each saved patient, each avoided tragedy made our suffering worth it. My relationship with my mother had grown stronger through it all. From devastated nurse to national consultant, she liked to joke about my career pivot. Trauma turned into advocacy. Nakamura swapped power suits for prison jumpsuits. Through every collapse and comeback, my mother had been my anchor. Now, we met every week for dinner, not to discuss legal plans or money, but just to enjoy each other's company again. The nurses from our support group remained close. We celebrated each other's milestones and supported each other through the setbacks. Catherine became an ethics instructor for nursing students. Sebastian started a nonprofit that advocates for whistleblower protections in healthcare. All of us had found purpose in what we endured. 2 years after the surgery that started everything, I received a message I didn't expect. The girl, now a teenager, wanted to meet me. Her mother arranged for us to have lunch. I was nervous. What do you say to the child whose near death changed the course of so many lives? She was full of life, bright, animated, laughing freely. The only sign of her ordeal was a thin scar hidden beneath her shirt. She thanked me for saving her life. I tried to tell her it wasn't just me, that so many people had made that possible. But she was firm. "It was your voice," she said. "If you hadn't spoken up, I wouldn't be here." Then she told me something that took my breath away. She wanted to become a doctor, a good one, the kind who never operates impaired, the kind who speaks up when something isn't right, the kind who remembers what it means to protect others.
My actions had inspired her choice of career. It was a profound, full-circle moment, one I never could have imagined during the worst days of my ordeal. The hospital where it all began continued its transformation. New leadership fully embraced transparency and accountability. They invited me regularly to speak to staff about the importance of reporting concerns. The same institution that once tried to erase me now held me up as a symbol of integrity. I never returned to bedside nursing. The scars ran too deep, and my new path felt more impactful. Through consulting and advocacy, I could influence change across many hospitals. I could protect other nurses from experiencing the trauma I had endured. Life found a new rhythm. My days were filled with meaningful work, helping organizations build better systems. My evenings were spent with friends who understood the depth of the journey. Weekends were often devoted to volunteering at free clinics, where I could still put my hands to good use and remember why I entered nursing in the first place. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it had purpose. The Excellence Award named after me continued annually. Each recipient reminded me why the fight had been necessary. These were young nurses who refused to stay quiet, who stood tall against powerful figures in defense of patient safety. They gave me hope for the future of healthcare. Sometimes I crossed paths with former colleagues who had chosen silence during my battle. Some offered heartfelt apologies. Others still looked away. I didn't carry resentment. Fear is powerful, and not everyone can rise above it. I was simply grateful that when my moment came, I found the courage to act. The ripple effect from our case kept growing. Other states passed stronger whistleblower protection laws. Medical schools updated their curricula to include ethical reporting practices. Healthcare systems invested in fostering safer workplace cultures. The change was slow, but it was real. On quiet evenings, I often thought about Dr. Mendoza's victims. Not just the little girl who survived, but the many patients who were harmed while leadership looked away. Their suffering, though unjust, had become the spark for justice. It hadn't been in vain. My current department was modest, but peaceful, decorated with handwritten thank you notes from nurses I'd helped and photos from speaking events. It symbolized a life rebuilt from ashes. Not what I had imagined, but authentic, hard-earned, and meaningful. The settlement funds remained mostly untouched. They represented stability, not indulgence. After living through years of scarcity, I no longer feared financial collapse. That safety net let me keep doing advocacy work without sacrificing security. Patricia Tang and I stayed in touch. She had expanded her legal practice, focusing entirely on healthcare whistleblower protections. From time to time, she would call to share updates on new cases, always reminding me that my courage helped lay the groundwork. The hospital's transformation became a national model. They openly published their journey from denial and cover-up to accountability and reform. Administrators from across the country visited to learn from both their failures and their progress. I found unexpected joy in mentoring young nurses who reached out after hearing my story. Many were facing their own ethical dilemmas and needed someone to walk them through the murky terrain. I helped them navigate systems, understand their rights, and most importantly, find their voice. My physical health had finally stabilized. Regular exercise and therapy helped mend the toll that years of stress had taken. The nightmares no longer haunted me. In their place was a calm sense of purpose. I had survived something that should have destroyed me. 3 years after the settlement, the Oversight Committee released its final report. The hospital had successfully changed its culture. Patient safety metrics had risen across the board. Staff satisfaction was at record highs. The suffocating, fearful environment that once enabled disaster had been replaced. The committee emphasized that meaningful change was only possible because whistleblowers had demanded it. They recommended all hospitals build proactive reporting systems, not as a response to crisis, but as a core part of patient safety. Our suffering had become a case study, a warning, a roadmap. I kept traveling and speaking, but now my message came from a place of resilience, not pain. It had evolved from a cautionary tale of retaliation into a hopeful vision of what healthcare could become when truth and safety were prioritized over image and revenue.
The young nurse who had received the first Excellence in Integrity Award in my name reached out. She had recently advanced to a leadership role and was rolling out innovative patient safety protocols. She credited my story with giving her the courage to always put patients first. The legacy was continuing. Life had settled into a meaningful rhythm. Mornings were spent consulting with hospitals working to reshape their cultures. Afternoons went to writing policy recommendations and developing safety frameworks. Evenings were for dinners with friends who had become family through shared hardship. Weekends were filled with volunteer work and mentoring. The anger that once consumed me had hardened into resolve, a resolve to ensure that no one else endured what we had. Every policy revised, every nurse empowered to speak up, every patient shielded from preventable harm was a tribute to what we had fought for. My mother remained my most steadfast supporter. She had watched her daughter nearly destroyed for doing the right thing, only to rise stronger. Our weekly dinners had become small celebrations of survival, resilience, and everything we had reclaimed. She was proud of who I had become through the fire. Sometimes I thought about the life I might have had if I had stayed silent, a quiet career, less turbulent. But regret had no place here. That little girl was alive because I spoke up. Countless others were safer because we exposed the truth. The cost had been great, but the value was immeasurable. This new life was one I'd never imagined, but one filled with deep purpose. From trauma, I had found transformation. From devastation, a mission. The system that at once tried to silence me had, in the end, amplified my voice across healthcare. As I packed for another speaking engagement, I paused over my nursing license, still valid, though I no longer worked at the bedside. It now represented something more, not a profession, but a principle. First, do no harm. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. Speak truth, even when it threatens power. That night, the audience was filled with nursing students, bright-eyed, eager, on the cusp of careers. I told my story not to frighten them, but to prepare them. Healthcare needed professionals brave enough to confront wrongdoing, steady enough to withstand backlash, and devoted enough to persist until justice prevailed. Their questions after the talk showed they understood. They asked how to recognize impairment, how to report safely, how to support peers who spoke up. They were entering healthcare with open eyes, aware of both its nobility and its dangers. They would become the guardians of safety we needed. Walking to my car, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Another group of future nurses better prepared. Another institution examining its culture. Another step toward a system that truly honored its mission. My phone buzzed. A message from Layla. The hospital was dedicating a new center for patient safety, in honor of the nurses who had risked everything to speak the truth. They wanted us all to attend the opening. It was yet another sign of how far we had come. From silence and intimidation to recognition and reform. I drove home through the city that had once broken me, past the hospital where I had worked, rebuilt, past the courthouse where truth had prevailed, past the apartment where I had nearly lost everything. Every landmark whispered part of the story. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more institutions to help transform, more nurses to guide. But this night, I simply felt grateful. Grateful that I had spoken up. Grateful for the allies who stood with me. Grateful that pain had not been wasted, but shaped into something lasting. The little girl whose blood had once stained the operating room floor was now a thriving teenager, laughing, dreaming, healing, planning a future in medicine. Dangerous doctors no longer operated unchecked. Nurses now felt safer coming forward. Administrators had learned the real cost of protecting reputations over lives. We had changed the landscape. My life was not what I had imagined. It was better, real, hard-won, deeply rooted in purpose. The young woman who had walked into that OR years ago would hardly recognize the person I had become. As I entered my apartment, my eyes fell on the framed photo sent by the girl's mother. Her daughter at her birthday party, radiant with joy, her scar hidden beneath a bright sweater, alive because one nurse refused to stay silent. It had been worth everything.
I settled into bed, knowing tomorrow would bring new opportunities to protect patients, to empower healthcare workers, to keep pushing for the kind of healthcare system people deserved. The fight for transparency and accountability wasn't over, but tonight I could rest. We had made a difference. The truth hadn't triumphed through some cinematic reveal or sweeping declaration of justice. It had prevailed through persistence, through endless depositions, painful testimonies, painstaking policy reform, and the slow, stubborn reshaping of institutional culture. We had dismantled a corrupt system brick by brick and helped lay the foundation for something better. My story was no longer just mine. It had become part of a wider narrative about systemic change in healthcare. Not a tale of personal heroism, but a testament to collective courage, the kind that grows in quiet resistance, in shared sacrifice, in refusing to be silent even when silence feels safer. We had proven that ordinary nurses, when united by truth, could stand up to powerful systems and win. Sleep came easier now. No more scanning the hallway through a peephole, no more rerouted walks home, no more anonymous messages or doctored files. just the steady calm that comes from knowing you did the right thing, even when it cost you everything. Tomorrow would have its own battles, but I would meet them with the resilience forged in the worst of days. The journey from bedside nurse to patient advocate had changed me. It had been painful, it had been costly, but it had been necessary. Every talk I gave, every hospital I advised, every new nurse I mentored, it all paid tribute to those who had once suffered in silence. Their voices lived on through mine now. The award bearing my name would continue recognizing moral courage. The new safety protocols would protect patients I'd never meet. The culture we helped shift would endure long after I was gone. We had turned temporary pain into permanent change. I closed my eyes, holding gratitude for how far we'd come. The girl had her heart and her future. The dangerous surgeon would never operate again. The administrator who had orchestrated so much harm was finally held accountable. And I had rebuilt a life grounded in purpose. Tomorrow would come with all its demands, but tonight there was peace. The peace of battles fought and won. The peace of justice, however imperfect, finally served. The peace of knowing speaking the truth, especially when power tried to silence it, was always worth it. The peace of a life reshaped, not ruined. A life built on truth.